What is poppin', everybody? Welcome to the Coach's Quarters. I am your host, Jacob Meadows, and today we are going to be kicking off the AFC North show. This is going to be a good one. This division is absolutely stacked. I think all four of these teams have the potential to make the playoffs. I think all four of these teams have the potential to make a run. So we're going to jump right into the content, and we are going to start with the Pittsburgh Steelers. They look phenomenal. This preseason has been very nice to the Steelers. Steelers have looked very good all preseason. One of the better teams this preseason overall. A lot of people say that the preseason doesn't matter, but the preseason definitely gives you the ability to flesh out your depth and have an idea for how good your team is actually going to perform in crunch time. Right? These are the people that come in when everybody else gets tired, and this is really when you're able to work in your rookies, see what you got out of that. See if your offseason acquisitions are going to gel with everybody else. And yeah, the Pittsburgh Steelers crushed the preseason. Kenny Pickett's looked phenomenal. He's hitting virtually all of his throws. His timing looks good. The receivers are scoring touchdowns. The offense has been crazy efficient. However, do have one note for Kenny Pickett. It looks like he stares down the side of the field that the ball is going to go to. If you run the tape on the Atlanta Falcons game that just concluded, the full-on route, because the Arthur Smith decided not to roll out any ones against the Pittsburgh Steelers, when Kenny Pickett takes his drop back, he is staring down the side of the field with the receiver that he's going to go to. It did not look like he was going through his progressions. His first option was getting open every time. So it's going to be interesting to see how that translates to the regular season, just because whenever you're put up against the ones, whenever you're put up against the stars of the NFL, it's not always as easy as it is against the young guys or the guys that aren't necessarily going to make a roster anywhere. So that's my only side note on Pickett. He had a 118 passer rating against the Falcons, and he's looked miraculous this preseason. So it's a small knock, and it might not even be a knock if we get into the regular season and he's not doing it anymore. But they've looked good. Their whole offense has looked polished this preseason. You know, the running back room looks great. Najee Harris is a stud. Jaylen Warren looks good. Anthony McFarland's running violently again. They look great. Depth-wise, do the Steelers have the same quality of running backs that other teams in the North do? Maybe not necessarily, but it might not matter. Najee's gonna Najee, right? He looked great last year, and he doesn't look like he's missed a step. He's gonna play better than he did last year. So as much as I don't believe in the Pittsburgh Steelers, I believe in the Pittsburgh Steelers, right? So the receivers look good. I do like that they have Allen Robinson on the roster. I think as a wily veteran, I think he was a good addition for the younger guys. It's going to be interesting to see what Deontay Johnson does. There have been trade talks in the past about Deontay Johnson. There was a point where he was upset with the franchise and this, that, and the other. So that's going to be neat. I do think Deontay Johnson's looked phenomenal in the preseason, and I'm really hoping that everything is smoothed out between him and the organization, because he is good for the Steelers. He adds an extra element of depth to the Steelers that it would be very, very difficult to replicate, right? Beyond him, you have George Pickens, who was a certified stud his rookie season, has not lost a step. I would look for him to be an absolute fantasy monster, just because him and Pickett seem to have such good chemistry between each other. And then I'm only going to list off one other wide receiver, Calvin Austin II. I do kind of expect him to take off a little bit this year. Not saying he's going to have a 1,000-yard season, but I do believe that he is going to be that next dude up for the Steelers. I really like Calvin Austin II's fit in this offense. And then ping over to the tight ends and the offensive line, right? So Pat Freiermuth is good. I love the Darnell Washington signing at tight end. I think he gives them a huge element there at the tight end position. He can block, but he's also very, very fast, very, very big, and he can catch the ball like nobody else. Right, so Darnell Washington's going to be a pretty dope addition, I think, to the Steelers' offensive room. But their offensive line could be shaky. Personally, I like who they have on their offensive line. I think going out and getting the guys that they did in the offseason, the Isaac Seumalo and Dan Moore Jr., I do believe that they're gonna end up amounting to good signings. They needed the line depth. Kenny Pickett was sacked 27 times last season, so this was something that they really needed to do to right the ship, and they did it. Their interior offensive line is shored up. The depth looks good. Everybody's pretty polished. Tackle could become a problem should anything happen to the Steelers. They don't have great depth on the outside of their offensive line, which, I mean, that's where the tight end comes in, right? Like Pat Freiermuth is a good blocker. You can use your tight ends to shore up the offensive line there on the edges. Lastly, but on the flip side of the ball, Pittsburgh's defense, which they've been known for the entirety of the Pittsburgh Steelers franchise, their defense looks good. They made a couple of solid offseason acquisitions, in my opinion. Picking up Patrick Peterson, albeit 33 years old, but Patrick Peterson coming off a 56 tackle and 5-pick season with the Minnesota Vikings. Even if his play drops off a little bit, they brought him in to be a cornerback too. So he's playing opposite of Joey Porter Jr., the rookie taken out of the second round, pick 32. He is playing opposite of him, and I think Patrick Peterson's going to end up being one of the better signings this offseason. There are some grumbles that people think his play might fall off, but I think in terms of being a mentor to the younger guy and being able to step in and play that CB2 role, I think Patrick Peterson's going to gel incredibly well with this team. They also picked up Elandon Roberts, outside linebacker out of Miami. He has looked terrific this preseason. The one thing I can say about him is he might end up being a coverage liability. We'll have to see how that plays out. He's a monster against the run. He's looked ridiculous this preseason. Just against the Falcons, he had a ridiculous stat line. It was like 1 sack, 1 QB hit, and a handful of solo tackles. So look for Elandon Roberts to really go off for this Pittsburgh defense. Not an offseason, not a free agent acquisition, but 4th round rookie Nick Herbig. I think Nick is going to be nuts. So he has had one of the better preseasons for an edge rusher, rookie or otherwise. And I believe that if he can take what he's done here in the preseason and replicate it during the regular season, TJ Watt's gonna feast off of people. Between the two of them, they're going to have so many quarterback hurries and quarterback hits that Pittsburgh might be able to own the momentum of virtually every game that they play in. Right, so it's going to be cool. I like the Steelers this season. I don't like them to win their division, but I do think that they are going to just absolutely rain on some people's parades this year. I think Pittsburgh's put together another good team. Good for Mike Tomlin, one of my favorite head coaches in the league. I think that they are going to be a massive force. Extra recognition to Minkah Fitzpatrick returning, of course. You have him, you have DeMonte Casey and Keanu Neal at safety. I like Miles Killebrew, the backup strong safety. They picked up Levi Wallace, the ex-Bills cornerback. He's going to be good for them, I believe. I wanted Houston to pick up Levi Wallace at one point. I really like him at corner. Alex Highsmith is a stud at middle linebacker. I think he's going to end up being pretty good. It's just there's so much talent on this team. Quan Alexander, he just got fined, which is a bit ridiculous for a QB hit against the Falcons, and it was a totally normal hit, right? There's no reason for him to be fined, and that's one of those, patty cake football arguments for another day. But they have a team. Cameron Hayward's still on the defensive line. Isaiah Loudermilk's going to be a stud. I like what they have done. So I like Pittsburgh. I do think that they'll be better than the Brownies. I am a semi-bandwagon Browns fan. I have been since one of the guys that I went to school with, his brother was drafted by them way back in the day. But they are going to be good. The Steelers also got a little lucky with the 8th easiest strength of schedule. So there's an opportunity here for Pittsburgh to make a massive run. Right now, I believe the Vegas odds are for them to win 8.5 games this season. That's the safe bet. I do think that they end up pulling off more than 9 games. I think the Steelers, but there's a good possibility the Steelers end up winning 10, and it's not out of the realm of possibility, right? So kudos to the Steelers. They've had a great preseason. They've had a great offseason, and they are going to be a team to beat this year. All right, moving on. We have the Cincinnati Bengals next. That is I probably should have covered them first just because that seems to be the fan favorite amongst the AFC North. But second is good. And everybody knows Joey Burrow, plays quarterback for the Cincinnati Bengals. He suffered a right calf strain earlier in the preseason and has missed all of the pre. Reports are good coming out of Cincinnati about Joe Burrow. There's a lot of optimism that he's going to be able to start week 1 against the Browns. But if he doesn't, right, Trevor Siemian has looked really good in pockets throughout his career in the NFL and is in line to take the start for Cincinnati there. And honestly, I mean, it's Trevor Siemian and the Bengals offense versus a Cleveland team that hasn't necessarily shown up and shown out this preseason. That could make for a really, really good week 1 matchup and a good divisional matchup early on in the season. Joe Mixon is back with the team. Joe Mixon stepped away earlier in the season, or months and months and months ago, for legal troubles. They have dropped the charges. Everything is good to go for Joe Mixon. He should be hungry this year. I like Joe Mixon. I know there's a lot of hate for Joe Mixon. There's a lot of people that don't necessarily like him. But I've taken him on fantasy quite a few times, and I'm a big fan of Joe Mixon. He's good as a receiving back. He's good as a thumper. He's elusive. He's got that real nice first cut when he's in space. I like Joe Mixon, and I like with the upgrades that they have made to the offensive line, which I will cover here in a second. I think Joe Mixon might be in line for one of the better starts of his career, which would be really interesting, especially with as competitive as the AFC North is going to be this season. That strong run game is going to make all of the difference. And every other team in the AFC North has a star running back that most people would put above Joe Mixon. So with the upgrades to their offensive line, I like Joe Mixon coming in for the Bengals and being able to actually do some real effective damage for them. On to the wide receivers. In my opinion, Cincinnati may have the best starting wide receiver core in the NFL, and not because of Jamar Chase. Jamar Chase is a stud. He's their best receiver, but Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins are absolutely unsung heroes of Cincinnati. If T. Higgins were to ever become available, Houston should definitely launch at him. I think T. Higgins is probably, he's a top, 10 wide receiver in terms of just raw talent. Or raw ability, right? He can high point a ball like nobody else. He's got the speed to keep up with anybody in the league. His footwork is fantastic. He can catch a cold in the desert. I think T. Higgins is just the X factor beyond Jamar Chase, whom has one of the better chemistry sets with Joe Burrow of any wide receiver and quarterback in the league, courtesy of their time together in college. But if you break down the stats from last season, right, you have Jamar Chase with 87 receptions, 1,046 yards, and 9 touchdowns. You have T. Higgins with 74 receptions, 1,029 yards, and 7 touchdowns. You have Tyler Boyd with 58 receptions, 762 yards, and 5 touchdowns. And they did that while not having to throw the ball all game, every game. They had breaks. Joe Mixon was a good running back. Joe Mixon had a good year as well last year. So the ability to have 3 receivers that can go up and they can put up these numbers that, quite frankly, other teams in the league wish that, they had more than one receiver that could achieve some of this. It's fantastic. And it looks good for Cincinnati. And with Baltimore losing some secondary to injuries, which naturally we'll cover later. And you have Cleveland with a secondary that is wishy-washy and they seem to change. There's no continuity with Cleveland's secondary, right? So Pittsburgh might have the second best secondary there with a rookie corner and Patrick Peterson. So with the Bengals having the firepower that they have at wide receiver, it bodes well, at least in the division, right? And then outside of the wide receivers, the tight ends, you bring in Irv Smith from Minnesota and you have Drew Sample still on the roster. And Irv Smith has some moves, right? If he is healthy, he is lethal. He is a weapon. Minnesota used him maybe in an underutilized kind of way when he was still in Minnesota. But if Irv Smith can stay healthy, he adds just another element to this offense where they can stretch the field however they wish. he gives them that ability that they can kind of do whatever they want. Joe Mixon can block. Irv Smith can block. Drew Sample can block. It opens up virtually any set that you can imagine in an NFL playbook. They're going to be able to run whatever they want on whomever they want to a certain degree of success. And lastly, that offensive line that I mentioned earlier, they brought in Orlando Brown from the Super Bowl winning Chiefs, which was a massive signing at left tackle to shore up Joey B's blind side. And they brought in Cody Ford from, I believe, Buffalo as well. Fact checking that now. And they picked up Cody Ford as well, guard that started with the Buffalo Bills and was with the Arizona Cardinals last night. Cardinals look like they're fire selling everything. So no, Cody Ford goes, Orlando Brown goes, and now you have an offensive line that might not necessarily be the biggest weak point of the Cincinnati Bengals, which is awesome considering that Joe Burrow has been sacked a gazillion times already in a handful of years. This looks like a very, very good step in the right direction for an offense that was already making strides in the right direction. It really looks like Zach Taylor's putting together a team that will make a run and can compete with anybody. And if you ask me, on offense, the Bengals have a better roster than the Chiefs this season, which is not going to be a popular take whatsoever. But I do believe that on paper, on the field is a totally different thing, but on paper, the Bengals have a higher profile offense than the Kansas City Chiefs, which, is good for the NFL. Any sort of competition is good for the NFL. So long were there a handful of good teams, and then the rest of the NFL was just a dumpster fire, right? Like everybody was fighting for second and third, but now you're starting to see more of these teams come out, and they are elite. They have elite players, and the level of competition has genuinely risen over the last couple of years, and it's good for all of us. It's good for the fans, it's good for the players, and it's good for the pocketbooks of everybody getting rich off the NFL. On the other side of the ball, Cleveland is returning almost all of their starters. They did lose Jesse Bates. Jesse Bates was a bona fide stud at safety. I do think that they're going to miss Jesse Bates a little bit. They did add a safety in Nick Scott. I believe Nick Scott actually played for the Rams last year. So that shouldn't be too bad. They are going to miss Jesse Bates. No matter what happens, I do believe they miss Jesse Bates just because I think Jesse Bates was arguably an underrated safety in the league. However, they also lost Eli Apple at cornerback, which not necessarily that big of a loss because they replaced him with Sidney Jones. And Sidney Jones, I believe, is a much better cornerback in man coverage and can also play zone as good, if not better, than Eli Apple. So Sidney Jones is going to give that defense a little more versatility and allow them to play the ball a little better. I think Sidney Jones might not necessarily have... Well, no, he's about the same tackling. Both of them do. Sidney Jones is a little more aggressive at the point of tackle, I believe, but in terms of pure tackling ability, I do believe they're about the same. So you're not losing anything at corner. If there is any movement whatsoever, they got better at cornerback. Took a dip at safety, just a smidge, but at corner you stay the same. And they added Jermaine Pratt at inside linebacker, unless they roll him out to the outside. And that defense really started to gel last season, and I do believe that with the people that they have brought in with their draft class as well, I do believe that the Cincinnati Bengals again have a better team on paper than the Kansas City Chiefs. With that being said, I do think that Cincinnati also has the best roster on paper in the AFC North. It is kind of hard to say that with Baltimore's resurgence, but no, it's not actually. No, Cincinnati is the best team in the AFC North on paper for sure, in my opinion, right? They did have a really good draft class, I think. They picked up DJ Ivey at corner and DJ Turner II at corner, both of which have already been slotted in as second-string cornerbacks, which bodes incredibly well for their draft class, right? Whenever you can take two guys, one of them being a seventh-round pick in DJ Ivey, he was picked 246 overall, and he's already slotted in as the second-string cornerback. That's a steal, right? One of two things. One, it's either a steal of the draft and you found somebody who can play above what their level of competition was at the collegiate level, or your secondary already sucked and it didn't take much to make it better. I don't believe the latter is true for Cincinnati. They may have gotten, a little lost in the sauce on the back end a couple of times last season, but by no means did they have a bad secondary. So having two corners come in, and DJ Ivey and DJ Turner, and then being able to kind of take the heat off the starters a little bit by solidifying that second corner role, I think that bodes very, very well for the Cincinnati Bengals defense. All right. Yeah, and going back to something that what I said earlier, when I mentioned the Ravens and them having some potential injuries in the secondary, bringing up the Ravens, they've had, and Marlon Humphrey got hurt. He was questionable that last preseason game. He's going to be questionable going into week 1. I hope Marlon's healthy. Marlon's one of the highest paid, but also one of the most elite cornerbacks in the NFL when healthy. They have Trayvon Mullen that's been out. Trayvon Mullen is a personal favorite of mine coming off of the Raiders. I really wanted him to go to the Texans naturally, but I wanted Trayvon Mullen to go to a winning team, so I like that he landed with Baltimore, right? So before we cover all of the defense here, this was my segue into our third team of the AFC North and the Baltimore Ravens. And the Baltimore Ravens will always have a special place in my heart because one of my buddies growing up is a diehard Baltimore fan, and I've got nothing but joy over years and years and years of history of talking trash to Cody about the Baltimore Ravens and their inability to finish, right? So with that being said, I do believe Baltimore has just as good of a shot at the Super Bowl as the Bengals do at this point. I think Baltimore put together an incredible team this offseason. They've been good every year for the last couple of years. If Lamar Jackson can stay healthy, and if everybody can, not hate one another throughout the season, as it seems like there's been some less than stellar moments where there was some finger pointing and maybe some not so great, attitudes towards one another. If we can avoid that, right, Baltimore has put together a Super Bowl winning team. They bring in Odell Beckham. Of course, everybody knows who Odell is. And if Odell can stay healthy for probably the first time in a while, but if Odell can stay healthy, Odell gives the Baltimore Ravens a weapon unlike anything Lamar Jackson has had through his tenure in Baltimore, right? They've put together quite the wide receiver core. After taking Zay Flowers early in the draft, they have Rashad Bateman and Devin Duvernay returning. They reached out and got Nelson Aguilar. This is what one of the biggest knocks on the Ravens over the last couple of years has been their inability to really build this offense around Lamar Jackson, right? This has been a run-first offense. Lamar runs, or one of their running backs run, and the passing game is almost an afterthought. Well, this offseason, they actually went out and they put together a hell of a wide receiver core. One that it maybe instills more confidence than what they've had the last 2 or 3 seasons, which bodes well for Lamar. They went out, they drafted a left guard, and I will butcher this name. I don't even know how to break this down, but I don't know how to actually say that last name. However, they went out and they got him in the draft. They went out, they got Andrew Voorhees in the draft, whom is also injured at the moment, but he plays guard, and Andrew Voorhees is going to end up being a very solid depth guy for the Ravens. And it just feels like this team's going to be able to maybe gel, right? You have Mark Andrews at tight end, who's a top 4, top 5 tight end, depending on who you ask. In my opinion, he's the 3rd best in the league when healthy. Behind him, you have Isaiah Likely, who, if you were to come to this show and look for fantasy football advice, I would say Isaiah Likely would be a good dude to, I don't know if anybody's actually going to draft him. He'd be a good final round stash and save, or a really, really, really strong free agent acquisition right after your draft. Because I think, although they do have Mark Andrews, 1, Mark Andrews is injury prone. 2, Baltimore can run 2 tight end sets, and 2 tight end sets work perfect for Lamar Jackson's skill set. So having a burner in Isaiah Likely, who is an incredible receiver, on the other side of Mark Andrews, all of a sudden you have one of the most high-tempo offenses in the league. You center that around an offensive line that isn't terrible, right? You have Ronnie Stanley at left tackle, who's been around for a long time. He's seen a lot of things, and he's really, really good at what he does. You have the rookie, the Male Sala rookie at left guard. He's actually starting. He's first on their depth chart, which is a hell of a grab for Baltimore. You have Tyler Linderbaum at center, who is a good center. He's been around for a couple of years, and he knows the ins and outs. decent footwork, strength is up. He's a good center. He plays the center of the line very well. You have Kevin Zittler on the right guard coming out of Cleveland. Guy was a stud for Cleveland. And I think Kevin Zittler is going to be good for Baltimore. And then at right tackle, you have Morgan Moses, who, again, he's been around for a little while. He's a wily veteran. He knows what to do and how to do it. So all of a sudden, you have this offense that can get almost anything done. Not to mention, they got Melvin Gordon in the offseason to add to a running back room with J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, Justice Hill, and technically Lamar Jackson. So once you mix all of that together, they have the most promising offensive roster that they've had in years, in my opinion. It bodes well for John Harbaugh. If there were any year that they were going to make another run for the Super Bowl, this would probably be it, if not next year, depending on the contract situations of some of these guys. But, honest to God, this would be a good year for a run. And what better time than now, right? You skip over to the defensive side of the ball. The Ravens have always had a good defense. This is a team that reached out and they traded for Roquan Smith out of Chicago, who was amazing in Chicago. It was hard to believe they even let him go. And they pair him with Patrick freaking Queen, who's just a lightning rod on the defense. They create one of the better interior linebacking cores in the league, in my opinion. You have a decent pass rush. I don't necessarily know all the names personally on their defensive line. You have a Broderick Washington. You have a Michael Pierce, Michael Pierce is one of the better nose tackles in the league. But beyond that, Angelo Blackson is going to be good. Odafe Owe has been a monster the last couple of years. David Ajabo is a monster. They have Tyus Bowser at linebacker. Jadeveon Clowney just signed with them. They reached out and they got Rocky Sin out of Las Vegas at corner. They have a handful of upper end corners, in my opinion, and Marlon Humphrey, Ronald Darby. Those guys are good. They've been around for a while. They know all the ins and outs. You have Marcus Williams and second-year player Kyle Hamilton at safety, both of which look promising, and they've looked good in the preseason. And then on special teams, which I haven't mentioned with the other teams, but it is worth mentioning here just because the Ravens do have the best kicker in the NFL. Justin Tucker is automatic and he can hit a field goal from 70 yards out if he absolutely wants to. So in culmination here, you have a Ravens team that is better than years prior, right? And despite the other teams in this division all improving, all three of the other teams in the AFC North have improved over the offseason and with the draft, the Ravens probably climbed the most. And the Ravens were not the worst team in the AFC North to begin with. So when you group those two together, it is a good, especially with Joe Burrow being hurt. So imagine, if you will, Joe Burrow doesn't come back very early or Joe Burrow gets re-injured. All of a sudden, the Ravens it becomes their division to lose. I know I sung the Steelers' praises, but the Ravens have a roster that can compete with any of the higher profile teams in the league. And I love that for Baltimore. I really do. I like Lamar Jackson. I hate this whole notion that he's a running back and he doesn't like his team and this, that, and the other. He represented himself. He got the contract that he was after. This is the year. Like, Lamar's got to come and ball out this year to justify his cost to the Baltimore Ravens. And it's going to be good for football. It's going to be good for the fans of all shapes and sizes, right? Baltimore is going to play exciting football. Even if they don't win a bunch of games, which they will, but even if they don't win a bunch of games, Baltimore is going to play an exciting brand of football. And yeah, at the end of the day, that's what we're all here for. Not to mention, this year, Baltimore lost the first preseason game in 24 games. I think Baltimore is just going to be pissed off to start the season. I can't emphasize this enough, and it's going to be something that I say dozens and dozens and dozens of times throughout this first year of me having this pod going, is that it's good for football. The level of competition raising around the NFL is good for the fans. It's good for the teams. It's good for the pockets of the players. Like, it is just an all-around good thing to happen because when the level of competition goes up, the competition level gets better, right? And that's a Tomlinism for you, right? It's just one of those things where as the level of competition around the league rises, you see even one, there's less blowouts, but two, you have more matchups that make sense. No longer are there 12 teams in the league that are considered as an easy dub for the good teams, because all the teams are good teams. And that is what the true product of the NFL should be, is just 32 teams capable of beating the living piss out of one another. That's what we watch it for, right? So that's kind of it. It seems like Baltimore has really bought into this whole idea that if you give Lamar somebody to throw the ball to, Lamar can throw the ball, as opposed to just running the ball 50 times a game. And it allows your defense to stay healthier. It allows your defense to stay off the field a little more. It allows you to be more versatile with your playbook. It allows you to do so many things that it's going to give Baltimore a chance to be uber competitive and a chance to overtake the Bengals as the kings of the AFC North that they once were prior to Joe Burrow's arrival. All right, so lastly, we're going to jump into the Cleveland Browns. I left the Browns for last out of the AFC North strictly because I am a closet Browns fan. I have been for years and years. They are one of the handful of teams that I silently cheer for, right? Outside of my Texans, the Browns are one of the teams that I do cheer for. However, they have not been as impressive this preseason, which means nothing, but they have not been as impressive this preseason as maybe some people would have liked them to be. We have seen a lot of good play out of Dorian Thompson-Robinson, their rookie quarterback. He got moved up to second slot on the depth chart after they ended up cutting Kellen Mond, bringing Kellen Mond back, and then they moved the other quarterback that was on their team that, for the life of me, I can't remember whom it was. But they ended up getting rid of another guy. Kellen Mond got brought back to be third string quarterback. But Dorian Thompson-Robinson was like the one bright spot of the preseason for the Browns. However, the Browns are returning a good roster, and they have made some pretty elite acquisitions, in my opinion, right? To start it off, you have Deshaun Watson out of Houston, whom, had the huge falling out with the Texans. That's terrible. We wasted a pick on him, wasted years of development on him. He wanted out of Houston. He made his way out of Houston. He definitely made it to where he got what he wanted. He wanted the big paycheck. The Cleveland Browns were dumb enough to give it to him. The contract that he got was just egregious, right? It's an albatross of a contract, and the Browns probably will and should hurt from it for a couple of years. They deserve it at this point. Right, but they did have Dorian Thompson-Robinson looking good, so he comes in as the second-string quarterback and gives them a really good option to go to should Deshaun Watson get hurt, right? Kind of like in Baltimore where you have a Tyler Huntley that can step in, and this is another take that not everybody will agree with, but I personally really like Tyler Huntley as a QB2. So this gives Cleveland a good QB2 to keep competing. So just like I said that the Bengals have Trevor Siemian, and just like the Steelers, the Steelers don't have a very good QB2. I can't include them. They have Kenny Pickett, and I don't believe in Kenny Pickett all that much yet. So that this puts Cleveland above the Steelers in terms of quarterback play, right? In my opinion, it's the only team in this division that I can confidently put them above right now. But they're returning Amari Cooper, right? Whom, if Dallas doesn't trade Amari Cooper, Dallas probably wins another Super Bowl before this year. The Dallas fans, the poor souls that cheer for Dallas, most of whom weren't alive when they won their last Super Bowl, we wouldn't be able to make those jokes if Dallas doesn't trade Amari Cooper. I do believe that. I think Amari was the piece that caused Dak to kind of fall apart. So Cleveland has Amari Cooper. Cleveland has Donovan Peoples-Jones, another guy that is just, he has played above what people expect from him every season in the league. And then Cleveland went out and made a shifty little move for Elijah Moore off of the Jets, whom there were some complications between he and the Jets because the Jets underutilized him. And I believe Elijah Moore is going to end up being the X factor for the Browns this year. Outside of Elijah Moore, they also picked up Marquise Goodwin, who had blood clots in his lungs and his legs early in the preseason. That dude's coming back. Marquise Goodwin has been one of my favorite receivers for years. He's a fast guy. He's a burner, but he's a great dude, right? Locker rooms love him. He's a great veteran influence. He's a gel guy, right? He's a glue guy. He's one of those people that really brings that roster together. So I liked them getting Marquise Goodwin, and I liked them getting Elijah Moore. And I feel like that the Browns have built a pretty solid wide receiver core. If Deshaun Watson can freaking figure out how to throw the ball and how to make decisions as quickly as maybe he did in Clemson or at Clemson, I think the Browns have the pieces to click. We just have yet to see them actually click. And then they do have a good offensive line. I like what Cleveland has done for their quarterbacks, right? Jedrick Willis Jr. is a stud. Joel Bitonio at guard is very, very good. Ethan Posick, I think it's Posick. I don't know how to pronounce it. I use him on Madden. I don't know how to pronounce his name, to be completely honest with you. He is good. I like Wyatt Teller at right guard. I think Wyatt Teller coming out of Buffalo is a very good guard. And then Jack Conklin's returning at tackle. Jack Conklin previously played for Tennessee, and Jack Conklin has been good for the Browns. I like him there. Not to mention, they did pick up Luke Whippler at left guard, and they picked up DeWand Jones as well at right tackle. So they were able to build a little bit of depth on the offensive line, as well as bolster an offensive line that is respectable. Beyond that, you're looking at David Njoku at tight end still. Despite there being trade rumors last season and throughout the offseason, David Njoku was retained. David Njoku is a good tight end. He's an incredible pass-catching tight end. He's got blocking chops, and he's a mismatch against safeties and linebackers, giving Deshaun Watson a threat that he never had in Houston, right? So David Njoku looks good. And then what did the Browns do? The Browns went out and got Jordan Akins, a guy that Deshaun Watson's actually thrown to. So that between David Njoku and Jordan Akins, I like what they were able to do at tight end to kind of solidify that receiving core. They got Deshaun Watson a familiar target. Deshaun Watson has a better tight end than he's ever had. Deshaun Watson has a better wide receiver room than he's ever had, which makes the whole notion that his preseason was sloppy just bonkers. But with that being said, he has the best offense he's ever gotten to deal with. Plus, the Cleveland Browns have, in my opinion, the number one running back in the NFL, a guy that fell to me in the third round of my fantasy league last year and carried me all the way into the playoffs, Nick Chubb, one of the highest paid running backs, if not the highest paid. I don't actually know the metric on that. But Nick Chubb's one of the highest paid running backs and easily, in my opinion, the best running back in the league. It's not a contest. It's not a knock on Derrick Henry or any of the other elite running backs. I just think Nick Chubb's game is more polished and refined, and he has a larger tool bag of skills that it gives him kind of an edge in that who is the RB1 of the NFL battle, right? In my opinion, Nick Chubb has all of the things that you look for in a running back, which is why the Cleveland Browns paid him big money at a time when running backs are not getting paid by anybody, right? So on the flip side of the ball, the Browns go out and they get Zadarius Smith. They have Dalvin Tomlinson at defensive tackle. They have Tristan Hill at defensive tackle. They have Maurice Hurst at defensive tackle, right? So they have them plus Shelby Harris and Jordan Elliott on the other defensive end side. They lose Jadeveon Clowney, but it's not that big of a deal because they also have Myles Garrett. They have Ogbo Okoronkwo, who was very good for Houston. I liked him. I'm going to be sad to see him leave. Right. So in a culmination of all of that, the Browns have a solid defensive line. Mixed in with Anthony Walker Jr. and Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, the linebacker returning from last season who took the team by storm. You have a secondary that's seen a little bit of overturned, right? There's not a lot of continuity at corner for the Browns. However, they're not throwing out bad corners, right? Greg Newsome, very, very good at their nickel. They have Denzel Ward on the right side. And then they have Martin Emerson Jr., who might not be quite as skilled as Denzel Ward or a Greg Newsome, but it's one of those things where you don't need everybody to be A plus, A plus, A plus, right? Like it's a team that's going to feed off of themselves. And they went out and they got Juan Thornhill from Kansas City, who is an incredible safety. They have Grant Delpit, whom they drafted and are developing. He is a really, really good safety. They have DeAnthony Bell. They have Rodney McLeod. Like they have a collection of players in their secondary that are capable of making plays. And just as a side note, going back to the linebackers, because I did miss a name that I really, really like, and that is going to, I don't know how to pronounce his first name. I believe it's Sione, but Taki was a linebacker that was mentioned all the time last season during the regular season. Taki was a good linebacker. So you have this air of depth with the Cleveland Browns that maybe they haven't necessarily had in the past. Do they have more top-end talent than other teams in the AFC North? Not necessarily. But they do have good enough depth to compete. And honestly, if Deshaun Watson can play the way that Cleveland apparently thought he could play when they shelled out all those millions of dollars to him guaranteed, this is a team that, one, the offense is good and they can stay on the field. They have a terrific run game. They can dunk and throw dunks all day long. Short passes are going to be the cream of the crop for this team, right? You can have Amari Cooper go deep. You can have him go over the middle. You can run 2 tight end sets. You have this ability to keep your offense on the field and really control the tempo of games so long as they can be consistent about it. And then on the flip side of the ball, you have a defense that's not necessarily built out of players that teams are going to throw first-round picks to trade for. But you have a group of people that play well together, for one, but that have a cumulative total amount of skill that is good. Their plug-in players are just as good as their starters for the most part. There are some positions where that's not necessarily true, but they have enough talent to be able to compete, and that's really all that matters at the end of the day. I do believe that the Browns. Well, let me preface it with this. The Browns will do one of two things, right? Either the Browns are going to brown and they're going to find some way to tank this season for no reason, or they're going to come out and they're going to look good and they're going to surprise some people and they're going to get washed in the division or the conference round of the playoffs, more than likely a division with as stacked as the AFC is this year. So it's one of those things where Cleveland can absolutely ruin the season for a couple of other teams, namely the other players in the AFC North, and they're built to do so. Just a spotlight on their special teams. They have Dustin Hopkins at kicker coming off of the Chargers. I like Dustin Hopkins as a kicker. I do believe that he is going to be good for them. I felt that it was a little disrespectful to Cade York to tell him that he was on his way out after Cleveland really, blew smoke up his ass last season about, drafting a kicker and this, that, and the whatnot. But I do believe that Dustin Hopkins is arguably a better kicker. So they're looking at a better team. Again, maybe not necessarily as improved as the Baltimore Ravens, but they are improved. So they're going to round out, this is the fourth of 4 teams, they're going to round out a division that is going to arguably be the most competitive division in the AFC, sans the AFC West. So it's good for football, the competition level rising, right? I've said it 50 times on this pod alone, or on this episode alone, but Cleveland has given themselves the opportunity to be in contention, which is all that they were after anyways. With that being said, we are going to close down this episode. Thank you all so much for joining in. I am so sorry for the 2-week gap in between episodes. That was never my intention. I had some family come and stay with me last weekend. I've been under the weather a little bit. I could have put a show out, but I didn't think that the quality of the show really would have kept up with what I am trying to put out for everybody. So here we are. And hopefully we can kick off this. I should have another show coming out soon, and I'm hoping to chunk quite a few more out prior to the start of the regular season. I have kind of run out of time. So look out for more episodes coming out a little more frequently than what you're used to, especially following a 2-week hiatus, right? Before I let you go and I shut this thing down for good, I want to give a massive shout out to Matt Heiner. one of my previous bosses, and one of the only people who truly supported me when I was going to Vegas with the Pixar In Pod, and we were doing our gambling show at the Virgin Hotel and Casino. Matt Heiner. Matt was definitely one of the guys that were kind of in my corner, cheering me on from afar. And much love to you, man. Shout out to you. Thank you for being a friend of the show. And thank you all. Thank everybody. And I will see y'all again very, very soon. This has been the Coach's Quarters. Peace out.